For more, we are joined by Matthew Orr. He's a Eurasia geopolitical analyst. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us. So, as we head into the summit, we've heard President Trump swinging between tough talk and a more conciliatory tone towards President Putin. Which version of Trump do you think will show up in Alaska?
Yeah, I think the version of Trump that we're going to see in Alaska is one that is trying to encourage Putin to accept some sort of a deal or believe a deal is in Russia's interest. But I don't think that President Trump is going to necessarily, be able to offer Putin the things that he wants that are going to make him agree to a ceasefire in short order. I think it's very clear that the two sides are going to talk a lot about their bilateral relationship. They're going to talk a lot about, things like removing sanctions on Russia. That's intended to kind of sweeten the deal for Russia and agreeing to a ceasefire. They're even going to talk about strategic issues that have built up, things like nuclear arms control. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think Trump is going to try to take this very positive tone and say that the summit was very successful and essentially try to be very nice to Putin. But I don't think that is necessarily going to be effective or successful. And despite the two leaders probably at a press conference after the summit saying that the talks were very productive, I don't ultimately think that this kind of softer version of President Trump is going to be enough to really sweeten the deal to convince Putin to make decisive action, certainly not at this summit.
Okay, so it sounds as though you don't believe the chances of success are very high. I'm curious, why is Putin so confident? We're hearing a lot about battlefield successes. I'm not sure if you heard our previous package, Professor English saying the Russians are also suffering. So give us a sense of what's happening, at the front lines right now and how that plays into the summit, which is going to take place hours from now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that President Putin thinks that what's happening on the battlefield is one of the biggest arguments in support of his sort of maximalist position and his idea that you really need to accept my demands. He thinks that Russian forces are able to continue advancing. He's being briefed all the time that the Ukrainians are essentially running out of men, running out of manpower, and that essentially because the Ukrainians lack troops, the Russians can sort of continue this kind of degrading of the Ukrainian army, a war of attrition, certainly for several more months. And so the battlefield situation is exactly what I think Putin is going to try to really accent and use in support of his arguments. He's going to make this proposal to Trump that the Ukrainians essentially need to preemptively evacuate more parts of their own country that they still control. And Putin knows that demand is a complete non-starter for Ukraine. But the point is that it's a win-win. By making that demand, his goal is to frame the Ukrainians and the Europeans as the obstacles to peace. But if the Ukrainians were to accept that demand, that would be very destabilizing to Kiev and actually make renewed Russian aggression even worse and really make the Ukrainians have a very difficult time holding the front line. And so all of those factors are what's driving Putin to sort of maintain this maximalist position. I think the only element that could really weaken Putin's hand that we're still not seeing is everything related to the Russian economy. And so I think that if Putin were to, for some reason or somehow actually reduce his demands even further, it would probably be because of some calculation about the Russian economy being weak. But for now, we're not seeing that at all.
Okay, let's talk about those very severe consequences that President Trump has threatened. You just talk about the economy. Are there tools in the president's, if you like, kit box right now that allows him to make demands apart from, those tariffs, big tariffs on countries that buy Russian oil? Is there anything else he can use as leverage?
Well, I think in theory there absolutely is. There can be much greater restrictions on other parts of Russia's oil and gas sector. I'm thinking about things like Russia's LNG sector, its LNG exports, things like that. Other economic sanctions that can essentially further tighten the screws. More threats of secondary sanctions on countries that are cooperating with Russia economically. right, the realization of the exact example that you gave. Those are the kinds of things that he certainly could do, and I think that they are considering. I think the problem is that Putin doesn't necessarily believe that those are very high likelihoods at this time. I think he's still willing to kind of draw this out and really make the Americans make the next move on this. And so I think that the point is that President Putin wants President Trump to be convinced of this idea that America's economic leverage is actually rather weak. And so I think that President Trump actually will have to reach for new sanctions against Moscow in order to really get it to weaken its negotiating position. I think the problem is that it's not immediately clear what levers that those could be, that at least in the near term could, very rapidly change Russia's negotiating position. These are typically the kinds of things that take many months to sort of play out and have an effect. And when we talk about secondary sanctions, right, for example, on purchasers of Russian oil, that's something that also hurts the U.S.'s bilateral relationships with key partners, and so it comes with certain drawbacks and risks for the United States. And so, no, I don't think that the U.S. necessarily has very obviously effective sanctions levers that it can reach for.
Okay, in terms of levers that Putin has, and notably, we noticed that Putin isn't just bringing diplomats to Alaska, but he's also bringing his top economic minds, including the finance minister who led Russia's sanctions response. Could Putin reframe this war as a biz opportunity for Trump? And if so, what can he offer that might appeal to the U.S. president?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's going to be one of Putin's biggest goals at this summit, to show the U.S., right, some of the benefits of the Trump administration essentially agreeing with its position and vision for the end of a war in Ukraine. And a piece of that vision is, of course, the Americans coming in and playing some sort of larger role in Russia's economy. That's meant to, right, there was this talk of a critical minerals deal with Ukraine. Well, of course, the Russians have been offering their own critical minerals deal with the United States. And of course, the Russian critical mineral wealth is much greater than that of Ukraine. So all that, this kind of topic is really intended to entice the Trump administration to sort of weaken its negotiating position and really buy into these possibilities. The really interesting element of this proposal is that really this is a piece of cooperation that's directed against China. The idea is that basically if the Americans are coming in and playing a larger role in Russia's mineral sector, then presumably it's people like the Chinese that would be lose out on that, not be the main beneficiaries of that cooperation, because otherwise the assumption is that it's countries like China and potentially other Asian countries that would have the capital, be willing to put up the capital to develop some of Russia's natural resource wealth. And so, of course, the Russians want to offer that as a very kind of enticing carrot to the United States. The problem is that on this matter, we could see some loud statements about how a deal on this topic is moving forward, but we're not going to see a major deal that's actually kind of actionable in the near term.
So, Matt, what about the prospect of a nuclear arms agreement, which Vladimir Putin has brought up as well? I mean, how important is this to the U.S.? Is it something that will make them go, hey, we want that?
Yes, I mean, I think it is relatively important to the United States. I think that it is the last nuclear arms treaty the major one between Russia and the United States is the New START treaty. It expires in 2026. And so I think that you could argue that there is an interest in both sides to, establish some sort of potential successor to that agreement. I think one of the problems is that this agreement expires in just a matter of months, and so negotiations would have to be very complex negotiations on this topic would have to take place. And I'm somewhat doubtful that a truly comprehensive replacement to that agreement can really be negotiated in such a short time period. But I think it is clear that both sides are interested in this topic. I think President Trump had made sort of statements about this earlier, several months ago, about how he's trying to look to work with China and Russia to make deals on arms control and reduce nuclear weapons counts and things like that. And so I definitely think that this is a topic that's going to go forward. From the Russian perspective, they really like this topic because they want to use it as an example of the kinds of topics that the U.S. needs to work with Russia on, and why the U.S. needs Russia, and therefore why the U.S. needs to endorse Russia's position vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine. And so this will definitely be a major topic at the summit.
Understood. Matt, we do have to leave it there. Nice talking to you this morning. We've been speaking with Matt Orr, Eurasia geopolitical analyst.